Welcome to another episode of real-life haunted stories. If you love chilling tales and spine-tingling horror stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a scare. New nightmares drop every week. Stay haunted. So, let's start our today's episode. Today, I am going to share very creepy stories from that late-night Uber driver from his village. I have collected stories from him last night. Hope everyone will enjoy today's episode. Story 1, The Abandoned Orphanage. Nestled deep within the forests of Ranapurar, Nige, hidden from the world, stood the remains of St. Agatha's Orphanage. It had been abandoned for decades, yet its charred walls and broken windows told a story of tragedy. The villagers warned travelers to stay away, for it was said that the spirits of the forgotten children still roamed its halls, searching for something or someone. Neil, an urban explorer and documentary filmmaker, had always been fascinated by haunted places. When he heard about the orphanage, he knew he had to see it for himself. With his best friend, Ayesha, and cameraman, Kabir, he set out on a journey to uncover the truth. But some places should remain undisturbed. The orphanage loomed in front of them, its rusted gate hanging open as if inviting them in. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped drastically. Aisha shivered. "I don't like this, Neil." Kabir adjusted his camera. "Let's get some footage and leave." They wandered through the crumbling hallways, their footsteps echoing. Faded paintings of children smiled down at them from the walls, their eyes seemingly following their every move. Then they heard it. A faint giggle, the sound of small feet running just ahead. Neil turned his flashlight toward the noise, but the corridor was empty. They found themselves in what used to be the dormitory. Rows of tiny rusted beds lined the walls. Kabir panned his camera across the room when, suddenly, his lens flickered. Through the viewfinder, he saw a small figure sitting on one of the beds, a child rocking back and forth. But when he lowered the camera, the bed was empty. Aisha gasped. "Neil, look." Scratched into the wooden headboard of one of the beds were the words, "Help us." The giggling returned, but this time it was all around them. Following a trail of muddy footprints, they reached a door at the end of the hallway. A rusty chain dangled from its handle, broken. The door creaked open on its own. Beyond it lay a staircase leading down into darkness. Neil hesitated. We should turn back. But Aisha, as if in a trance, began descending the steps. Kabir and Neil followed, their flashlights barely cutting through the suffocating darkness. The basement smelled of mildew and something else. Something rotten. Then they saw it. Tiny handprints covered the damp walls, some smeared with what looked like dried blood. In the center of the basement stood a circle of tiny wooden chairs, all facing a large, cracked mirror. The air felt heavy, pressing against their chests. Neil's flashlight flickered. Kabir's camera shut off by itself. Aisha let out a choked sob. "They're here." The giggling turned into whispers. The whispers turned into cries. The cries turned into screams. The mirror suddenly shattered, revealing a hidden doorway. Beyond it lay a pit filled with tiny skeletons, their hollow eyes staring upward. And in the corner stood a woman in a torn black dress. Her back turned to them. She turned slowly. Her face was twisted eyes sunken, mouth stretched too wide in a grotesque smile. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. The walls began to shake. The shadows closed in. Neil grabbed Aisha's arm and ran, pulling Kabir behind them. The basement door slammed shut. Just as they reached the top of the stairs, they bolted toward the exit, the giggling turning into screeching laughter. The orphanage did not want them to leave. The front door was locked. The windows sealed shut. The portraits on the walls wept blood. Then the giggling stopped. A small hand slid into Neil's. A little girl stood beside him, pale and silent, staring up at him with hollow black eyes. She whispered, "We need more friends." Aisha and Kabir turned to run, but Neil could no longer move. He felt himself being pulled back into the darkness, into the orphanage that never let its visitors go. The last thing he heard was Grete, the laughter of children, welcoming their newest playmate. Story 2. The Curse of the Forsaken Cemetery. The village of Bhairavpur was like any other rural settlement in West Bengal, serene, surrounded by endless fields of golden paddy, and inhabited by people who lived simple lives. However, unlike most villages, Bhairavpur had a dark secret. At its outskirts lay an ancient cemetery, shrouded in mist and mystery. Overgrown banyan trees stretched their gnarled roots into the graves, their twisted branches forming eerie silhouettes against the moonlit sky. No one entered the cemetery after dark, and even during the day, people only stepped inside when absolutely necessary to bury the dead. The villagers spoke in hushed whispers about the Shapitu Shamshan, the cursed cemetery. They claimed that for over a century, those who dared to enter at night never returned the same. Some lost their minds, some disappeared entirely, and those who survived were haunted by nightmares so vivid that they eventually took their own lives. Despite these warnings, a young man named Ritwik refused to believe in such superstitions. Ritwik was a skeptic, modern-minded young man who had recently returned to Bhairavpur from Kolkata. The village elders, including his own grandfather, often spoke of Bishaka, a vengeful spirit that roamed the cemetery. They said she was a bride who had been murdered on her wedding night and buried in an unmarked grave. Bishaka's cries still echo in the night, his grandfather warned. Those who hear her voice are doomed. But Ritwik laughed it off. "Come on, Dadu. It's just a graveyard. The dead don't come back." His childhood friends, Suman, Anik, and Preeti, were equally skeptical. One evening, they all sat under the village banyan tree, arguing about the existence of ghosts. That's when Anik proposed a challenge. "Let's go to the cemetery at midnight," Anik suggested with a grin. "Whoever stays the longest wins." Despite a slight hesitation, Ritwik agreed. After all, what was there to be afraid of? At exactly 12, the four of them sneaked out of their homes, careful not to wake their families. Armed with only a flashlight and their phones, they made their way to the cemetery. As they stepped through the rusted iron gates, a sudden chill ran down Ritwik's spine. The air inside the graveyard was unnaturally cold. The full moon cast eerie shadows across the moss-covered tombstones. The silence was so deep that even the rustling of leaves sounded deafening. Then they heard it. A faint sobbing, low and sorrowful. It was coming from the oldest part of the cemetery, where the forgotten graves lay beneath thick, wild grass. "Just the wind," Preeti whispered, but her voice trembled. The sobbing grew louder, a woman's voice filled with despair. Ritwik's throat went dry. He turned his flashlight toward the sound, and what he saw made his blood run cold. A woman in a blood-stained wedding sari stood between the graves, her back to them. Her long, tangled hair reached her waist. She wasn't walking. She was floating. Suman panicked first. He turned and ran toward the gates, but before he could reach them, the old iron doors slammed shut on their own, trapping them inside. The woman in red slowly turned her head. Her face was half decayed, her hollow eyes nothing but dark pits. She opened her mouth, and from within came a sound no human should ever make, a shriek so shrill and piercing that Ritwik felt like his skull would split open. Suman collapsed to the ground, convulsing violently. His eyes rolled back, foam forming at his lips. It was as if something had entered him. Preeti screamed, shaking Suman desperately, but he remained motionless. His skin grew pale, and his body went stiff, as if his soul had left him. Anik grabbed Ritwik's arm. "We have to get out of here, now!" But the woman in red raised her hand, and the wind howled through the cemetery like a furious storm. The tombstones rattled, the trees groaned, and then the earth beneath them began to shift. Something was crawling out from the graves. The ground cracked open, and skeletal hands emerged from the dirt, clawing their way to the surface. The air was thick with the stench of decay. Ritwik watched in horror as figures wrapped in rotting burial cloths began pulling themselves out of their graves. Anik shouted, "Run!" But their legs felt leaden, as though an unseen force was holding them in place. One of the corpses, its jaw hanging loosely, lurched toward Preeti, who shrieked and stumbled backward. Ritwik, acting purely on instinct, grabbed a fallen branch and swung it wildly, barely grazing the approaching figure. A whisper drifted through the wind. "You brought them back." It was Bishaka's voice. The ghostly bride floated closer, her skeletal fingers reaching for Ritwik's face. "You do not belong here. But now you never leave." A sudden clang echoed through the cemetery. The gates burst open as if some unseen force had granted them passage. Anik seized the opportunity and grabbed Suman's limp body. "Go!" he yelled. Ritwik and Preeti bolted toward the exit, their hearts hammering in their chests. Just as they reached the threshold, Ritwik dared one last glance over his shoulder. Bishaka stood at the center of the graveyard, her hollow eyes locked onto him. The last thing he heard was her chilling whisper, "You will return." And then the gates slammed shut behind them. Back in the village, Suman remained unconscious, his face deathly pale. The elders surrounded him, murmuring ancient prayers. Ritwik and the others barely spoke of what happened, but they knew one thing for certain. The curse of the Forsaken Cemetery was not over, because, ever since that night, Ritwik could still hear Bishaka's voice in his dreams. And when he looked in the mirror, sometimes it was not his own reflection staring back at him. One evening, he awoke to whispers inside his room. His door creaked open on its own, revealing the darkness beyond. Then, in the dim light, a shadowed figure stood in the corner, a bride in red, her hollow eyes fixed on him. "I told you," she whispered. "You will return." The candle beside his bed flickered and died, and Ritwik realized he was never truly free. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, to show your support, comment to share your thoughts or ask questions, and don't forget to subscribe to to stay updated with our latest content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload.